Please welcome Rob Latimer.
So it was a Friday night. It's actually almost 2 years ago exactly. It was October 21st, 2016. It's a Friday night, and on that Friday night I was in West Hollywood, and I was having dinner with one of my best friends in the world, Heidi. And it had been kind of a shite 2 weeks because 2 weeks earlier, on October 7th, news had broke of a recording of the then GOP presidential candidate and now President of the United States. And on this recording, he bragged about being a serial sexual assailant. And the reason that had affected me, other than the obvious reasons, is that I'm a history teacher. And for 2 weeks, nearly every single class, students would come in, mostly ninth graders, and they kept returning to the topic of this tape. They wanted to know what was the significance of it, how it was going to affect the election. Why was it that not only did so many people in the country not really seem to have a problem with it, there were actually people defending it. And they kept returning to these questions, not just because history class is where you talk about things like politics and elections, but because they knew, or at least some of them knew, that I'd worked for years with an assault prevention nonprofit. And so I had information for them. I could give them statistics, which are all fucking depressing. That 1 in 3 women will be assaulted in their lifetime. That 1 in 6, that'll be a sexual assault. That 1 in 5, that assault will come just in their college years. And I could tell them stories. Over the years, hundreds of students had shared their stories with me, and I could pass those on to my students to give them some idea of what it was like to live as an adult woman in America. But I was always careful to note that those weren't my stories. That wasn't my lived experience. I could only pass on what others had told me. And that's what the previous 2 weeks had been. It was just kind of a drudging, march through a number of very frustrating conversations where there weren't really any final answers. And we were talking about, it was actually the last thing we talked about that evening at Nori Sushi on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And we finished up our meal, and the waiter came with the check, and I took my wallet out of my purse to pay. You got that, right? Mm-hmm. Purse. It's actually a small little satchel handbag. It's patent leather, white and black, houndstooth. It's super cute. The reason I had a purse is that in addition to being a historian and a self-defense instructor, I'm a cross-dresser. And most of you probably have some idea what that means. You may not know exactly. What it is, simply, it's a man, usually straight, who presents in a feminine gender presentation as part of his gender identity, as opposed to, say, for entertainment purposes, like a drag queen. And if you're having trouble picturing me without the beard and with a full face of makeup and a wig, that's normal. Like, it's hard to see through the lumberjack here. But I got pictures. I'll show you afterwards if you want to see them. But so we were out that night, and I had been a cross-dresser my whole life. This is something just that I am. In fact, when I was a little kid, my mom has a story about me being fascinated by a Donahue episode when I was like 6 years old, and she for years blamed herself. She's like, I did this to you, and you don't know what to do with it. I'm like, no, that's just who I am. But for much of my life, I wasn't actually that comfortable with it. And it's only in the last couple years that I not only understand it, but have come to, and not just accept it, but like really embrace and celebrate it. It was only about a year and a half before the night in question that I'd first gone out in public presenting as a woman. Heidi had actually been there that night, and she'd been out with me several times while I was en femme. And we were out that night at Nori Sushi on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And we were talking normal, catching up, hearing about her projects, things like that. But we kept returning to the subject of the tape because, not just for the reasons you might expect, Heidi, I had met her originally while working for this assault prevention nonprofit. And we were commiserating and sort of, making sure we weren't both crazy here, that this thing that we had spent so much of our time and effort to fight in society, that so many people were seemingly okay with it. And we were very frustrated by this because, as empowered as we felt and as empowered as our students had felt, societal change doesn't work the same way. can't just knee society in the groin until the crappy parts leave. And so our conversation that night was kind of somber, and it was on this topic over and over again. And as I said, it was the last thing that we discussed before we left, and I was relaying to her the story of the conversations with my students and the fact that we over and over again came back to it, and that I tried my best to convey other people's stories to them so that they might come away understanding a bit more than they did before they came into my class. And so we left Sushinori and we went down Santa Monica Boulevard back towards Heidi's apartment. And we reached the crosswalk where we were going to go from the south side of the street to the north side of the street. And there was like 6 or 7 seconds left on the crosswalk, and we didn't want to try to rush across because I can't run in heels. But from the other side, 2 guys were coming, and they were sprinting across, trying to get there before traffic took them. And one of the guys ran off that way, and the other one ran right by me, and he bumped into my cute little houndstooth bag, and he ran around behind me. And I glanced down to make sure that that wasn't like some very subtle sprint by pickpocketing. And I looked over to see where he had run. And his friend had gone on further down the street, but he had stopped and he was now looking back at me. He was making eye contact, he was smiling. I remember thinking, is he flirting with me? That's weird. And I'm not attracted to too many guys, but in an objective sense, he was cute. You know, blonde hair, well-groomed beard. I'm like, oh, that's weird. So went back, waiting for the crosswalk, talking to Heidi. And a few seconds later, I felt something touch my shoulder, and I looked over here, and he was standing here, smiling. I thought, oh, he was going that way with his friend. That's interesting. I turned back to the crosswalk, to Heidi. And right around the time I was figuring out, oh, you know what? I think he was what touched my back. I think he ran his fingers through my hair, but because it's a wig, I didn't actually feel it like you would with your hair. I had to figure that out. And as I was figuring that out, I became aware that something was touching my side. I looked, and he had now sidled up against me. Later on, Heidi would recount, he's like, yeah, I turned around, there was a guy on your back. And as I was registering that he was here, and so gentle that I barely even noticed him, I began to realize that his left hand had gone underneath my skirt. And his index finger was on my butt cheek, and his ring finger was on my thigh, and his middle finger was in that little crevice where your butt meets your legs. And his fingertips were curled underneath and caressing my taint. And then he moved in front of me, and he looked at me, and he's smiling. He says, I know your secret. Yeah. And it's at that moment that my brain snapped into the situation and realized, oh yeah, that thing you thought had happened. That he had groped me in a crowd of 12 people on a busy street in West Hollywood at 10:30 at night on a Friday. And I replied to him in my man voice. I said, is my secret that you're violating my personal boundaries? And I honestly expected that to sort of be the end of it, because I'd said things with that kind of tone and that sort of like vaguely implied threat before. And it always gave people pause, at the very least. And it didn't give him pause. Those words went right past him, and he started into a rambling story. And as I recognized that he didn't care about my words, I recognized that he didn't see me as a man who had 30 pounds and 3 inches on him, not counting the heels. I didn't know exactly how he saw me, but I knew that when he looked at me, he saw somebody whose person he had no duty to respect. And because of my size and my training, I didn't feel worried about my physical safety, but I definitely heard the threat hiding in those words. He knew my secret. He had identified what he thought was a lever. He was going to use that to pry me open or move me where he he wanted me to move. And I actually started thinking, is he gonna figure it out at some point and walk away, or am I gonna have to hit him? And I remember Heidi's here, and I was like, you know what? If he needs to get hit, I should probably let her do it. Because she's just as good a fighter as I am, if not better. And the cops, if they show up, they're going to be way cooler with her laying him out than me. And as I'm thinking that, he ends his rambling story with an invitation to go back to his new apartment with his new roommate and get drunk and do blow. And I declined, even though it was a very attractive offer. And the walk signal came on. And Heidi said, here's our signal, and ushered me across the street. And as we were in the median of the boulevard, we looked back, and fortunately for all of us, he was not pursuing. And we reached the other side, and we started walking back up Santa Monica Boulevard, and Heidi joked, she said, well, it's your story now. And I laughed. Though in the days that followed, I started to question that a little bit. Because I found myself sort of unwilling to even call it an assault, because I never felt in danger and I wasn't hurt. So I'd had conversations with people relaying it. I found myself having to sort of almost force myself to call it an assault, because I knew black letter law, it's assault. California Penal Code 243.4, it's a misdemeanor sexual assault, $2,000 fine, 6 months in jail. And I also felt other things in the days that followed. I felt guilt, which I thought was kind of weird. I found myself thinking, well, I mean, did I invite him back by making eye contact? Maybe if I hadn't made eye contact with him, he'd have just kept walking and brought him back. And I also felt shame. Because when he was flirting with me, or I thought he was flirting with me, it was certainly flattering in a certain sense. And even though I don't think about guys that often, I've had fantasies about guys being attracted to me, especially when I'm en femme. So maybe I wanted it. And as I felt those things, I realized, oh, I've heard this before. And all those stories. I've heard this from nearly every assault survivor I've ever talked to. So yeah, it is my story. Except for one little part, one little remnant of privilege. The next morning, Saturday morning, I woke up and I didn't worry that the events of the evening before were going to repeat themselves. Because when I got home the evening before, I'd washed off the makeup, which takes altogether too long. Not believe how much foundation I have to use. I'd taken off the wig, and I knew Saturday morning I was going to roll out and the world was going to see a guy. And that was going to shield me from much of that stuff. And I now still, though, I'm not sure how to reckon with that. Reckon with the fact that that Saturday morning I benefited and felt safer because of that shield. And it's the same shield that gave that guy on the street, made him feel like he could grope me without consequence. And it's the same shield that continues to shield the now President of the United States from the consequences of his actions. And I'm not certain what to do with that. And when students ask me, and they start to recognize how fucked up this world is, and what the hell do we do about it? And how is it that we have a society where one's appearance and one's identity can protect some people from the consequences of their actions and make other people a target for the immorality of others? I don't have an answer for that. I'm not certain about how to answer that, because society's inequalities and injustice isn't some dipshit out on Santa Monica Boulevard I can knock on his ass if I need to. It takes slow, incremental change. It's the change of water slowly eroding rock. There's no neat little checklist I can just say, oh, here's what we need to do. So I'm still uncertain about that. And the only thing I really am certain in regard to this is that we still need to do it. I can't be certain whether or not I'm going to be alive, whether any of us are going to be alive when we finally do it, but I am certain that we deserve a world where that story is nobody's story.